hand tools. The other thing I found that I think is interesting is the nailing. These are huge nails to put into the ladder. I did some test drilling, test nailing before I did it.
Long, you mean, or thick?
Like this. Poke out the side because the hard grain was pushing them out. 14 out of 16 times in my testing that happened. So what I did when I built this ladder is I pre-drilled the hole. You ever do that as a carpenter? When you're drilling a hole and you don't want the wood to split, you pre-drill the hole. So
was that done on the original?
Well, that's my guess. Oh. I think you did, because I think you would have had much more splitting of the rungs and the rails if you didn't do it. But I don't know that for a fact.
You couldn't, could you, if you took that original apart, could you tell?
I don't know. I'm trying to think of a way. First of all, I never would get permission.
I know that.
But I don't know a way to test that, because you'd have to kind of look in and you have to see drill holes. And the nails themselves probably would go right through and destroy the effect. I had also at my disposal, these are two of the actual nails used in Hauptmann's garage. There's a guy named Stuart Lutz who purchased the collection from Stanley Keith, who was a metallurgist who studied all the nails, and did a whole paper on them, and was supposed to put them in the court, and they decided not to use them. But Stanley had a bunch of the nails that were not used in the study that were rusting and didn't have enough detail on them to be used. And he gave me 5 of them. I gave 2 to the museum, 3 to the museum, and I kept the other 2 for my research. So I use the same kind of nails.
I just had my birthday.
I don't know, 10 hours, 12 hours. It's a lot of work.
Because you were trying to be very exact, or because?
It's why I'm hesitating, because I'm not sure how much time was drawn out because I was hesitating. But I would bet that in designing the ladder, you have to think about what you're doing first. For example, when I built the drum, what I did was I clamped them all together and I drilled the dowels and cut the mortise locations before I nailed the rungs onto the ladder pieces so they get good alignment. So you have to think out those kinds of things to make sure it's all good. Because you have 7 different pieces of wood coming together right now. So you have to be really sure that if they're going to meet.
How long do you think it would have taken him to build it if he'd done things like this before and just was?
Oh, I would have to say I would bet it would take him 10, 12 hours.
You think it would take that long?
Yeah, I think a couple of days of cutting in. Maybe maybe an 8-hour day if he's really on top of his game and moves quickly and stuff. Probably be going down.
Kel, have you climbed on it?
Yes. Right now, you can see there's supports on there. See that there?
Yeah.
I put those on because this was supposed to be used in the show. They were going to do a reenactment of the kidnapping, but they decided that to demonstrate 1 or 2 guys with the ladder would be presenting a kind of a controversial fiction. So they dropped it. But before I put the supports on, I put the 2 sections together, the bottom one and that, and I climbed up and I jiggled, and it was fine. So I think the whole idea that only a certain weight will take the ladder is a complete myth.
What do you weigh?
I weigh 200.
You could climb it?
I climbed it, yeah.
And was it jiggly at all when you climbed it?
Not so bad.
So you didn't have anybody
holding it?
it?
Right now, you want to see
But
it.
you didn't have anybody holding it? You climbed without someone holding it?
Oh, yeah, no, I climbed. No, that's not good.
So why did you rope?
Yeah. I found something wonderful about this. In fact, let me get a photo that I think is...
Now, this is your correct report. The police were finding the original kidnap the next day up and down all day. Right. And at some point during the next day, that's in the press report.
Why don't you come over and look at the ends of the ladder?
This is rail 6. Oh, no.
No, this is the 12.
The 12.
This is one of the things I discovered that I never thought of. Many times I looked at the ladder, I never thought of this until I built it. If you look at the wood here, you'll notice that this is what's called flat sawn. And flat sawn means that the rings are pretty much perpendicular to the edge. See how they go up and down? So the rings are going this way and the dowel's going that way, right?
The winds or what?
The rings.
Rings.
The rings. See how they go up and down?
Yeah.
Quarters. And if you look closely, you can see that the rings are actually pretty much layered from top to bottom like this. A little bit of curve, actually. They're layered like that. This is a natural path for splitting. So when he put the dowels in, and he put pressure on the ladder, there's a natural tendency for the ladder to split right there. I think that was the big fatal
That was
flaw.
what.
That might not have done it. It might be that he jumped on it suddenly. It might be if I jump on this suddenly, if I go like this, it might break down. But I think that was a big flaw in the design. You get a dowel, let's put it together.
I'm climbing it. I'm too fat. I'll break the whole thing.
What baby are you kidnapping tonight?
You might be probably.
Yeah, I might be proof. I might be proof, Ronelle.
All right. Let's see.
There's it. You're going to put it in its fold. Hauptmann was a good carpenter, wasn't he? Look how quick you're doing it, too.
Yeah, how long?
You didn't have to take time doing it. Wow.
Can a man handle this ladder by himself? Yes. Could have done it. Does it take long to do? No. Certainly if he was panicked or a kidnapper was panicked, they would fumble around probably like the way I just did. But it's not hard to get together. Can a man carry a baby in a ladder? If I carried that big heavy duffel in this, carry it all the way here from the bus, it could be done. And a carpenter tends to be fairly athletic. When you're a carpenter, and you're doing all kinds of wood, you tend to be more ambidextrous, you tend to be a little awkward. It's doable. Going down tends to be, by the way, a harder thing on climbing. Holding yourself back is a lot harder than a lift. That might be why going down, you're reaching this long rope. You might suddenly get too low. I think that's awkward. I think the logical is you have a sack of money, let's put it over your back. There's a lot of ways to solve that problem if you chose to. I'm not saying that's what happened, and I'm not saying that Hauptmann worked alone. I think that's the great mystery of the case. But I think it could have technically been done.
His size and weight, carrying his oar that way. Is that quite similar?
Yes, and Hauptmann probably, his combined weight in my belly is probably as much as the baby in Hauptmann. He was a smaller guy. What do you weigh? Anybody know?
At the time, he would have been about 165.
Okay, so I weigh, I hit say, 205. So I weigh another 40.
So maybe.
Now, you know, this is reinforced now. And this is reinforced. But, like I said before I put those reinforcements on, I did this test, I climbed it, I jiggled around like this. So, and what this means to me is that the theory that a ladder of this construction would not hold is not true. The ladder of this construction will hold. The particular case of that ladder with the grain the way it is, maybe with some sudden movement, something split it, that's what's going to happen. So all in all, I kind of think the ladder is kind of a, if I would give it a grade, maybe I'd give it a flunky grade of stroke. Side
It had, but the splits will go in the end. The splits will go 12 and 13, the bottom two rails.
Pardon me?
These are the rails that split, right?
No, what happened was it split right here. It split here and the split traveled up to
Oh, the
here.
middle split.
Yeah, the middle split. It cracked right here. See how close this is to the edge too? Another factor.
Was that a mistake on him putting it too close to the edge of the hole?
That's probably part of it too, you know.
And the other thing was the grain, right?
And the grain being parallel. And maybe, we don't know what happened exactly, maybe a sudden movement like that to split it.
Kelvin, is it possible, since it was pre-used wood, that it had dried out and become a little brittle?
That could be. It could have been, this is new wood, and Hauptmann's wood, as I was saying earlier. But these two rungs anyway was a little bit older, and it might have actually had less flexibility than what you see here.
Now,
I doubt that was a big
according to
factor.
press reports from the next day, AP reports that the police took the ladder. They were climbing the ladder all day, and then the ladder broke after the police had been climbing all day. That's in the AP report.
Well, no, I can tell you why that's not true. I have a photograph from the Albany Times-Union from the morning after the kidnapping. It shows the ladder up against the wall, Lindbergh baby kidnapped, the day after the kidnapping, the morning of the kidnapping, the morning when it was announced, and you can see the split sign.
They said there was a crack in it. The police climbed the ladder all day before climbing the rope.
That was a
couldn't have
replica.
climbed the ladder.
It was a replica.
What?
It was a replica.
Yeah, they climbed replicas. They also
No,
have
the
different-
original ones, and the police, the reporters
Replica.
from the next note. Then they had to build a replica.
I think the reporters got it wrong. Because you couldn't have climbed this
Let me say this.
like that.
You don't really know what to believe because there was so many stories that came top
I know, but I'm just saying,
the
it's
news.
the AP report, so it's their report that police find the original ladder all day.
How much you weigh, Joe?
180.
You're about
That's
size up.
about how
That's a
some
big step though to take. From the first, even from the first to the second. Imagine climbing down.
Oh, God.
Steve, you're in charge of catching her, Steve.
All right.
How much of a step? Ooh, you gotta be quick.
They found it about
So these two sections were together, and
They found these.
but no, I don't think I want precisely.
Then I'll just step back.
Oh, come on, Steve. I gotta get you kidnapping the baby.
You want me on the...
Yeah.
Sir, you left two female footprint stuff at the base of the ladder walking away from the house.
Stay there, Joe.
Really? Yeah.
Joe.
Marks. This is something that was on the original ladder, and Taylor noted that Hauptmann also had long pencil marks in the construction of his garage. Why do you think they're there? Anybody have an idea?
The measurement?
Next to mark for the, where they're cutting.
Yeah, why are they so long? The reason is because if you're trying to find the right width of this, you got two choices. Choice number one is you take a tape measure, you measure the board, you take the measurement, you mark here, you mark all that, you draw it out, and then you cut. Choice number two is you take the real board, and instead of measuring anything, you lay the board against the edge, you take a pencil line and draw it, and you're more accurate and you're quicker.
Yeah.
That's a common Carpenter technique.
You like that reason?
Yeah, I think that's what I do.
I would like to interrupt and get everybody together. Where are we going to, where do you want to make your presentation, Kelvin?
Wherever you like, whatever works for you.
Just like at the next cemetery where the money was paid, here are a couple of guys walking across the street. One of them dropped a handkerchief deliberately, another one looked in and saw her member sitting in the car. That might have been a lookout. Well, anyway,
I can find out about the truth about Rail 16, not based on anything, but what I can do through the forensics, through the actual physical evidence. I think one of the issues here too is we've been talking in words and words and words. For years there have been books in words and words and words. One of the evidence could have been planted. Like I said, I found very few that were fleshed out. And I boiled my research down to basically three questions. One, is the Rail 16 that was on the ladder at the trial and on the ladder today the original rail, or was it retrofitted after the arrest? That's the first one. That's one way they could think, right? They could take a board out of the attic, put it on the rail, on the ladder, and say, aha, it all matches. So that was the first test. Two was to try to determine what was the true relationship between Rail 16 and S226, which is the board from the attic, which is claimed to be a part of. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And the third, very important also, is to find out what is the relationship between Rail 16 and the rest of Hauptmann's attic. This has to do with the nail holes and some of the other stuff that I'll show you in a couple of minutes. That's basically the three questions. Those are the things that build the link between the kidnap ladder and the house of the kidnap. Okay? Now the first one was very simple to do, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. This is a photograph called, I call it the Springfield photograph because apparently it was taken on March 3rd, 1932, or 2nd, I'm not sure, immediately after the kidnapping. In order to verify its authenticity, I went to a number of archives. Here, for example, is a cropping of it from the Syracuse Herald, March 4, 1932. And if you go to your local papers, this was part of a photo spread called News of the World, and it appeared all over the country. So this shows that this photo was dated, the correct date, and in the photo, as you can see, as you saw, if you saw the Forensic File show, they used this. The rings, the grain, the deep grooves is like a fingerprint. It's a perfect match. If you go to a lumber yard and try to find a board to match the way these two go, you would never do it because the variables are astronomical. So this is clear evidence that this is, in fact, that from the time of the kidnapping, whatever the chain of evidence issues are, and certainly there are some with some of this stuff, this rail was the original kidnapping. Okay? So that's pretty simple. The next question is, what is the relationship between rail 16 and S236? Now, I asked that in a different way. Most people say, do they match? I don't like to do it that way for two reasons. One is matching is a very vague term. Does it match or not? It's like a rabbit test. The real question is, what is the truth? Something is true about the relationship of these two boards. Which truth is the truth? And like any question that's a multiple choice question, part of the way to solve it is to eliminate the possibility that there are two possibilities, right? Those are valid ways. There are three possibilities. One is that coincidentally they look similar. It just so happened that when they went up in the attic and they found the board and it coincidentally looked similar. That's one. Two is it was a forced relationship that they found the board that matched rail 16 and put it together. And three is that the two boards are a 160-something long slice that was part of the each one of those realities is a complete reality. It's not just the patterns, it's not just the grain. It's A, is it a coincidence? B, did somebody find the board that matched, dress it to match S236 rail 16 and the other attic boards, and bring it secretly up into the attic without being detected? All of that has to be true for that reality. And if they are one single board, they're a slice of a tree, and the correlations between the two have to be thorough throughout, not just the surface area. End view, the knots, the planing patterns, the thickness, all of that stuff. So the process was to go through all of those correlations and study them and compare them. Showed that rail 16 had less knots, which didn't make sense according to a man named Bischoff, because he said there should be more knots low on the tree than there are, because as trees get higher, they clear themselves of knots. This is absolutely incorrect. If you look at the trees around you, you can see a whole bunch of trees with no branches lower down. When these trees were young, right, they probably had a bunch of branches. So what happened? What happens is that as trees grow, the upper branches shadow the lower branches. The lower branches no longer have photosynthesis, and the lower branches do what's called self-pruning. They rot and they decay. On southern yellow pines, it's a very quick process because of the climate. So you have a process where when the tree is young, there'll be a lot, like a Christmas tree. You have a lot of branches close together, but as the tree grows, you have more and more branches towards the top. When you put these boards together, you see a pattern that's exactly consistent. First of all, you can't see it here, but rail 16 on its inner side, which is called the pith side, if I say that word, that's the inner side of the tree, has a whole lot of distortions in this area. The one you saw on the screen photo, it showed the location of branches that would have occurred when this tree was thinner, the cord grew thick enough to hold the board, that self-pruned and disappeared. Then you see on this side a number of branches going up the tree that would have overshadowed. See? When the tree grows to the outer side of the tree, you'll notice that a lot of lower branches self-prune. Most of them, this is gone, 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 and this is gone. And up towards the top of the tree, you can see that there are more branches towards the canopy of the tree. Now this is one of about several trillion possible variations on the growth of the tree, and the pattern does not prove they match. It only says that the pattern of tree growth on the branches is consistent with the way trees grow in the forest. By the way, the other thing about this is that the knots when I map them out, the knots, as you can see here, they're slightly higher on the bark side, the outer side, than the inner side. And that's because as trees grow, the branches grow outward. This tells us that one of the consistencies between the boards is that they both have tree growth in the same direction. The Rel 16 would be below S226 in the tree. This was said during the trial, and it's true.
Rail 16 is the lower part of the tree.
What's that?
The lower, Rail 16 is lower.
Correct.
Okay.
Lower than S226. Now, the end views. I put the ladder up on vertically the way you see it because I wanted to do something. If these rings here are specific years of tree growth. These are the layers of the tree. Okay? That's what we're seeing, a curved tree that's cut. So not only do the rings have to look like a nifty pattern, they have to be specific yearly rings, have to match specifically yearly rings in the pattern on the other side of the board. And not only that, but they have to match not just on the attic, on the outer side, which is the attic top side, the bark side, the outer side. They have to match on the inner side as well. So this is the bark side, and you can see the pattern. I colored them according to which year of growth they are in the end view sequence, and you can see that not only does it make a plausible pattern, but specific yearly rings of growth align in the pattern with the exact same year of growth in the board on the other side. Going to the pit side, this is the inner side. Oh, this is more the outside view. Same thing. There's the same.
Those are pictures that we seldom see on that side.
Whoops. But they have to both match up. So these photos were all taken at the same time to make sure that if you have two boards and you have one board that's a nice pattern on one side, there's no guarantee at all you're going to get this pattern on the other side because there's so much variation. The fact.
Wait, but the ring goes all the way through.
It's a curved board, that's right. But the curve can vary and change in shape, and the tree can vary in shape.
But why is there this greater space between the yellow and the red here and there's a full space?
What the reason she's asking about why there's a greater space here, and the reason is because this is a swell in the tree. It's like see that tree over there with the branches. You see how the branches have swells right at the bumps. They have bumps where the branches were. This is a swell in the tree, and it's much more acute around the branch. This is a branch that was actually dying at the time the tree was cut. See how big it is on the side? This is how small it is. This is the outer side, and it's deteriorating. And the tree was growing over it. It was self-pruning at the time the tree was cut. So that's a deteriorating branch right there. But there's much more arc right here because it's closer to the knot. And that's what you see. The other thing I found at the same time is that there's a series of V grooves in the edges and on the surface. And as you see, I plotted them out, and they make a kind of irregular but continual curve that appears to go around the knot. This is a split in the cambium. Sometimes on trees they have a little split, a little ripple in the wood. He said, look at this. Kaler put this photo together. Look at this. But there's a matchup. It doesn't match up. He says, Kaler said this was because of the planing of the board, but other wood experts, he says, don't agree. This is evidence that it's faked evidence. You look at this visual and you go, oh my God, he's right. Look at that. That doesn't match. That's off by 2. This is a delusion. It assumes that rings travel straight up the tree and stay perfectly parallel all the way up. They do not. Rings, first of all, if you look at a specific year of growth on a tree, as the tree grows, it's smaller and smaller. And secondly, when there are patterns like swells in the wood, the location of the rings will change with the swells. Now here's a sample of this, just to show you. This is a board I actually have this here if you want to see it. This is a sample here where, if you look at the surface grain, you see that this ring here goes over this way. This is the top ring in the arc of this board. But it's not the top here. The top here is 2 rings later. 1, 2. See that there? There's a 2-ring difference. And if you cut the board open, you find the same 2-ring variation that Kaler found when he did his, because this is swelling the tree. So how does the evidence go? Let's look. Here's the top ring here. Here's the top ring. Here's the same ring here. This is ring number, I think, 14, I think. Oh, no, that's 15. 14 and 13. There are 2 inner rings that are up at the top of this swell in the tree that are at the top of the arc here. When you look at this, if you understand it, you should expect that there should be a 2-ring offset in the rings on the end view. In other words, this tells me, just like it told me in my sample book,
And there was.
I should see a 2-ring offset. So this thing that that Scuduto was making fun of is not actually a disparity. This is a correlation. This shows that there's a 3-dimensional correlation of the end view rings and the surface ring. Now, I'm not going to go on about this because I know it's a confusing concept. In my report that's on the web, you can look at it more carefully and think it out to see if it makes sense to you. Now, the end views. This is my comparison of end views based on Taylor. If you read Algren and Monnier, they say Taylor said that the rings do not match in the end view because he imagined there was a knot in between, in the gap between the two boards. He said Kaler had cognitive dissonance. That's what he said in his book, or they said in their book. There's the knot. This is the knot right here. It's the one we've been looking at. And this is the distortion that Kaler was talking about. Kaler never said there was a ring, another ring in the thing. He talked about this ring right here, and it clearly distorts this part of the board. When I went to sample the board so I couldn't use this, I cut that out because that's what tree ring dendrochronologists do. They don't use wood that's close to the edge. I had to cut this out because that's cut off, right? So I ended up with a sampling area 1 5/16 wide. Now that sounds narrow, but when you're doing tree ring work as a dendrochronologist, you work with 3/16 of an inch. This is much wider. This gives us the possibility to compare 4 different things that are all variables in the tree. 1, the arc of the wood. Trees are not perfectly symmetrical. The arcs vary along the circumference. 2, the thickness of the arcs. Trees do not keep the same thickness along the rings. They vary in thickness along the circumference depending on how the nutrients are going through the tree. 3, the possibility of what we call microanatomical similarities, such as false rings, which I'll show you in a minute, which is a little trait that trees develop. And 4, the actual spacing of the rings themselves. Those are the 4 things. I made some macro photographs of the 2. This is on the web. You can get this for free on the web in the report that's at the website. These are 2 larger. Well, these are to scale. Okay. These are to scale. Okay. Okay. What I did here, by the way, just so you're clear, is I flipped rail 16 around because whenever you take the rail, here's the rail like this. Whenever you take it and photograph it, you end up with a backward image. So I reversed it, so it's almost like you're looking straight through the where rail 16 goes to S226. Starting at the bottom, the first thing is that you'll notice that the thicknesses of rings 6, 7, and 8 are thicker here, and then get thinner as they go down the arc. Thicker here, gets thinner as it goes down the arc. Ring number 11, same thing, thick up at the top, and then it gets thinner as it goes along. Ring 12 has a very thick clot of growth, which you can see right here. See that? And then it gets thinner, and then it gets thick again on both boards. Sometimes in tree growth, there's a very fine little false ring that occurs at the end of the early wood section. The light wood is called early wood. These 2 samples have false rings in exactly the same locations. Starting with ring number 8 here, there's a very thin false ring here, and then it gets dark, and then it gets light again. Ring number 8 here, you can just see it. It diminishes as you go down the arc. It's thin, and then it gets dark, and then it gets light again in the same way. Ring number 11 has a tiny bit of false ring and stuff. You can't see it very well, just a little bit there. But on the other end of it, going down the arc, it has a great deal of distortion right here like that, in the same ring, in the same place. Ring number 13 has a section of false rings below this alignment marker I put in, which is there and there. I'll pass this around later so you can see it better.
What causes false rings?
False ring is they're caused by frost and insect infestation, a lot of things like
So
that.
any tree growing in the same area is going to have the same content?
No. Generally, some of the trees in the same stand of the same age will have them, but not in the same location on the ring in the same
May I ask if this is a good time for a couple of questions? Is this all right?
You want to cut it short, you can, but there's some real good stuff. There's one more.
You have another element?
Yes.
Oh, please, go right ahead.
Yeah, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead. I thought that was it.
That's what you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ring 14 also has a false ring on both sides. This is a photograph I took. Well, I was talking to, by the way, I worked with Dr. Gordon's assistant named Nicole Davi. And he said, you know, we could do this all mathematically, but what you ought to do is just create a transparency and see how they match up. This is, I used that high-tech instrument we all love called the Xerox machine.
Yeah, that's an overlap.
I made two transparencies of high-contrast images, and I laid them over one to the other. And you are looking through both sets of rings from one board to the other. There's a slight twist here. I consulted with Dr. Warren Thompson of University of Mississippi. He said that's not uncommon, so that's acceptable. This only happens if the arc is a perfect match and if every ring in the sequence is the same thickness. If one of the rings is thicker than the others in the sequence, the whole thing would be off. You cannot get this from 2 trees. If Kaler and Borman went off and somebody said, hey, go down to the lumber yard and get a board, they'd still be there today. They'd still be there today. That's how compelling. And that is why all these wood experts that I talked to looked at this and said, this is a no-brainer. This is obvious. This is clearly the same board. And the reason, the other side of the proof of that is the practical argument that somebody planted the board and found that correlation is absolutely, as I said on my web the other day, patently ludicrous. So I challenge anybody to come up with a board that matches in this way. You will chase forever. That's why it's obvious that L16 and S226 are the same board. I got more on that, but for the sake of time, I won't. I do, however, want to talk about the other third leg of this, which I think is as compelling for me.
What was the name of the guy at Columbia? I'm sorry, I did. Jacoby?
It'll be on my report, but Dr. Gordon Jacoby.
Okay.
I also showed it. Dr. Alan Drew from SUNY ESF did a regression analysis of the rings. He said you would have to look at least 1 million boards to find another one like this, and probably even more. Dr. Gordon Jacoby and Nicole Davi said we're convinced these are the same board. Dr. Warren Thompson, who was the dean of the forestry school, said this is the same board. All of those experts. So it's not just me saying this. I want to be clear here. This was with all of their consultation and their scientific analysis to get to the point where I'm comfortable with this. Yeah.
The old photo, what is it called again?
Springfield.
Springfield photo has been talked that the nail holes weren't there when they took the picture.
Yeah.
What do you say about that?
Oh, well, they're on the, I did comparisons, and you can see them in my report. I've got them here, too, so you can see them, too. There are images in exactly the location of the nail holes. Now, you could argue, well, it's grainy, and those are just dots that appeared. But then, here's where the practical argument comes in. You have to believe that coincidentally, it happened that little dots got onto the negative of that photo in 3 locations in exactly the same location as the nail holes. How plausible is that? Now, to be sure, with the nail hole stuff, I didn't stick with just the Springfield photo. I have in my report another photo that appears to predate the kidnapping, and some other photos too that maybe we'll have time for later on. But I'm pretty comfortable saying
Predate the kidnapping.
Predate the predate the arrest. Predate the kidnapping too. But yeah, good point. Now, as I said earlier, I had access to some other boards from the attic. Some researchers who I can't mention today were in the attic in 1999, and they were given this little board and a longer piece of it. It's part of a stairwell that the owners have cut out to do a pull-down stairwell. I think it's board 11 from what I can tell. I compared it to some photos they took during the visit, and I have one that looks very strong that looks like that's the match. So that's a board from the middle of the attic. After the kidnapping, after the trial, a man named Leon Howage, who worked for Governor Hauptmann, purchased this entire board, board 26, which comes from the board next to where L16 came from in the attic. In addition, he was suspicious about some. Where is that board now? That's at the museum. It's in their warehouse, but it's at the museum. In addition,
11 you're talking?
11 is with the people who own it. But board 26 is at the museum in their warehouse.
Okay.
He also cut out, he wanted to get to this piece underneath. I won't go into this now. I did a piece on this, but he cut this piece out here of board number 1. And it's not the whole board, it's narrowed because of the attic hatch. It's about a 27-inch piece at the museum. So I got to have randomly 3 boards from different parts of the attic to compare. I made from the sample board here, I made molds of the tongue and groove, and I went to the museum and I tried them in the other boards, and you can see that these are a match, that they fit in. Sometimes I had to wiggle because the boards were worn and stuff, but look at the matchup of the tongue and groove profiles. So the question now becomes, well, so what? Maybe that's the way all tongue and groove boards are made. It is not. There are 4 defects to the tongues and grooves of these boards. All of the boards have tear out in the corner of varying degrees. The knives that were cutting the tongues were chipped and created tear out. Typically, with flooring like this, you usually make the outer section wider and longer for sanding and wear. Okay? So typically, the upper section in the pattern is thicker. In this case, it's actually thinner. And to go with that, and I think this is related, this section here is too thick to fit under the tongue where it's supposed to fit in. That's called a mismatch. Now, mismatches are fairly common, but the mismatches on all the boards is in the same direction. And what I think happened was when they were putting, they had a thinner section on top and they had that mismatch on the bottom. And finally, on the tongue and groove,
At 226, this is what 226 is mismatch on both sides of it, you're saying?
there's a mismatch on all of the boards. If you take part of the board and take the same board and put it underneath, because I have samples on all that, the place is thicker. This is too thick to fit underneath where it's supposed to. It's supposed to interlock underneath. The other thing that was very striking is that they all have a thin scratch-like groove. Here's a good example of it. This is on the under pattern side, close to the tongue edge. They all have the same scratch, and you can see these are scaled photos. They're all in alignment. So the tongue and groove patterns of S2 through 6 and the other boards all match. They also have some surface characteristics that match. You can see it a little bit here of 1 out of every 6 knives is slightly extended or slightly unstended on all the boards. And they all share this pattern here on both sides. Now, here's the last thing I want to talk about, and for me the most exciting. When I was doing this, I was noticing something about the wood, and you can see this if you look real close. See the wide grooves I've been talking, the wide rotation marks they're called there? Notice how on this board it ends close to the edge. You see that? I didn't know what to make of that.
What do you
kind
mean
of goes,
near the
it
bottom?
goes right that far, and then it looks like it's offset a little bit.
These wide grooves
The
here?
shadows, correct.
Yeah.
They stop about right there, and there's an offset there. See
Vertical
that?
lines.
I didn't know what to make of that because there's so much grain here, and there's so much what they call raised grain that obscures the planar marks. There's not much I could see. Then I went to the museum and did some more photography, and I took a photo of S226, and I found the same pattern. And I thought, boy, that's weird. What the heck is that? Well, board 26 is an unusual board because it has very few rings close to the edge. It's an odd-shaped tree. See how there's very few rings here? And on that board, the planar marks are in very good shape. And you can see that there was a sequence of planar defects that were offset. A broken knife right after the one making the 6th groove. Now this is lower than rail 16. So the first thing I did is I went over to S226 to see if I could find the same pattern on S226. This is the extension piece of S226 right here, and this is the sequence of planar defects on 3. S226 is in pretty bad shape, so I didn't get a lot here. But if you look closely, you can see that the same sequence of planar defects. Some of it is lost to the raised grain, but the matchup of the defect from here to here is absolutely compelling. It's like a barcode. The same pattern on the same board. The board 11 from the middle of the attic, it's the same way. It has This is board 11 right here, and this is the sampling area I used. It has, I know you can't see it very well here. It's on the internet. You can see this for free on the internet. It has the same matchup of the barcode pattern. Now, the upper part, you see these equal signs right there? Here's a close-up of two samples of them. Can everybody see these? If you look close, you see that there are two little square rectangles, right? You see them? If you look below, you can see there's a groove along the bottom. This is like the pressure bar was scratching the board as it came through. Everybody see the groove? Do you see that there's a little tail also? You see that too?
White line?
A little thin line. This is the next blade on the thing was chipped and it created a little ridge right there. You all see that? Great. That's great. This board here is board 26 from Hauptmann's attic. This board is rail 16 of the Kidnap ladder. Rail 16 has the same sequence of planar defects, 4 defects, as boards from Hauptmann's attic in the same place, in the same location.
Hey, Cal, I gotta ask
You gotta go. That's kind of the deal.
All right.
Now, so can I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm not sure you answered it because my mind is swimming, my brain is swimming. Let's say the boards all matched, it all came out of his attic, but you didn't solve the problem of the fact that Bornman lived in the house with nobody there to watch him, and he went up with a carpenter and God knows what they did up there. That's the thing I want.
Yeah, we know
The attic floor has the same planing characteristics. In order to get past that, you have to
The attic floor?
You have to invent the theory that the house, that the cops in their evil diabolical schemes built an entire attic floor at the house.
But you've been up in
That's
the
where you
house.
want to go, then I'm welcome.
No, but the attic floor.
Borman's being there in the
I don't, I'm not, his being there, not being there is not the issue. The issue is that
Well, it's an
these
issue
floors
for some
are all
people.
planar. Well, but
It's not your issue, but doesn't mean it isn't a legitimate issue.
How do you know the rest
Wait,
of the...
no.
Oh.
The fact that he was there is
I'm running
not
out of
proof
film.
He was
I
there.
didn't say it was proof of anything. I
You
said
know what?
it's reason for suspicion of what
Yes, but see, that's
You know what?
you're gonna
We
be-
can,
you have to come
we
up
have
with-
time.
How did he do it?
We have time on the next